Once I have an idea for a game, I start making prototypes as soon as I can. The early prototyping is probably the most important stage. We're trying to imagine different types of rules that might be applied to the system that we're basing the game on. You're basically trying everything you can think of for how to turn this concept into a game. Whatever it takes for you to cheaply get a sense of that's fun, that's not fun. Well, a prototype is usually interactive, not always, but usually. And we're taking like some little bit or part of the game that we have a question about. Should we go this way or that way? And it might be an interaction question. Is it better to have the controls work like this or like that? It might be a visualization or a graphics question. Should we do this point of view, that point of view? Should it be this style, that style? But it's something that we feel like we can't answer unless we actually touch and play with and interact with a little bit. Even if it's just turning the world around and looking at different camera angles. And that's when we decide, okay, we're going to build a prototype and we're going to build the simplest possible thing we can that will help us answer that question. As I'm playing with this one little piece in hand and imagining the rest of the experience, can I answer that question? Oh yeah, this would be much better top down. This would be much better 3D. This would be much better with that kind of player control. But it really needs to be answering a question as cheaply as possible. You don't want to go spend weeks and weeks building this. You want to build the cheapest, simplest little thing that you can build that you can sit back and say, okay, I'm pretty confident now that we go this way. As we get further down the path, it's, can somebody learn how to use this interface? And we can find out what the failure states are, how we need to change it to make it work better. And even further down the road, it's how engaging is this to players? And that's a much, much more open-ended question and a much broader range of answers that for certain people, this is very motivating. Most people, it isn't. Or it's somewhat motivating for a lot of people, but if we did this, it would be much more motivating. Or, the social component is working well here, but not the individual. So those are much more, I'd say, subjective in terms of interpreting the results. The very initial ones are very clear, usually, in terms of, okay, we go with A instead of B. And I think, we think of it in those terms. Prototyping can take different forms. I mean, sometimes it's cutting up little pieces of paper, and these are now game units, and you have, basically rules, and you can move your thing 2 spaces every turn, and you might have a very simple, turn-based 2-player game that you're moving little pieces of paper around. Other times it might be a more constructive experience where you're actually drawing something on a piece of paper, and you have rules about how much you can draw, and you add up how many things you've drawn and what the cost is, and you're actually doing like your own little kind of economic bookkeeping alongside of it. What we call paper prototyping isn't so much it has to be paper. It really more means that it's off the computer. You're not really programming, but you're doing it with tangible little objects. One of the things I tried starting a long time ago was when I was first coming up with a game and starting to pitch it around, I would actually make 2 or 3 different box designs myself. I just print the stuff out, glue it to the side of a box, put them up there, and show to people. Which one of these games would you like? It's all the same game in my mind, but these are 3 different ways of kind of informing what the game is about and presenting it. And in some sense, that's a marketing prototype. And I would say that, people really get box B, but A and C, they don't like it all. That would just tell me a little bit about how somebody initially thinks about this whole idea and which direction I should go in terms of communicating it. So that's kind of, in some sense, a communications prototype. Later on, as you start kind of playing with how we present this to the player or what's the interface, those are things that are fairly simple. And again, sometimes these are things you can just pull off the shelf and say, this game uses control scheme A, that one uses control scheme B, and they're both driving tanks. Which one feels better as I'm imagining the rest of my game, which might be completely different than these off-the-shelf games. But at least in terms of the controls, I can sit there and imagine my game with these controls. So these prototypes can take any form. It's anytime you have a question to answer, and you feel like if you could build something, whether it's a fake box or a control scheme prototype or even 2 games off the shelf that you're playing one little part of, will it help you figure out which branch down that design tree that you want to take? I found that when I make games, a lot of times it actually helps me to build real tangible things from the game before I actually build the game. When I was actually working on The Sims, at some point I decided I wanted to have a little neighborhood for the original Sims, and you would pick a house and build a house, and eventually you'd build little houses in the neighborhood. I actually first built a real model of a little, few houses and a little landscape. And this is the model I actually built for The Sims. And this is actually the original Sims, what it looked like. So it was actually a fairly close representation. For SimAnt, I built a giant ant. And for everything I've made, I've tried to bring it to the tangible. And it helps me think about it in certain ways when I'm actually touching it. And I wonder, like, in the game, how can I make it feel tangible? How can I make the player feel like they're actually touching something real here? As we start building prototypes, we might find, kind of sweet spots, really fun things. That's a really cool dynamic, or I like that tool, or it's really enjoyable making this thing. Um, then we start figuring out how can we, take those really good spots and spread it out through the rest of the design and make it part of the spine. On a game like Spore, we started building some of the editors very early on, and it was so fun building things in the creature editor. We decided, hey, let's see if we can do a building editor. Oh, that's cool. Let's see if we can do a vehicle editor. And so we decided that the editors would be, consistent across all the levels. They would operate pretty much the same, but each one was its own special thing. But yet it was kind of a core activity that kind of gave connection across the different levels. Because Spore really, otherwise was like 5 different games that happened to be connected. But the editors, gave kind of a thematic consistency across there. And player familiarity. When I got to the next level, I already knew how to use the editor. So I think we look for things like that, or even like the tools in SimCity. When you're laying down this, that tool operates pretty much the same. Like roads operate almost the same as the water pipes. You look for things that you can kind of leverage across the design. So once the player learns one thing, they've learned 5 things. But also gives kind of a consistent feel to the whole experience. Well, as a designer, I'm going to look at these prototypes, interact with them, and come up with some decision about where we should go. I don't care what they're built out of. So typically, depending on the programmer I was working with, they might be very comfortable with their own little code base, and they could very rapidly iterate that. So from my point of view, whatever was the least amount of friction for the programmer creating this. Because at the end, I just wanted to be able to interact with it for a few hours and then make a decision. And we're basically going to throw that code away. Or the programmer might actually take that code base and evolve it into the next prototype. There's so many different programs. It could be, JavaScript. It could be Unity. It could be, hardcore C. I don't care, again. But that really depends a lot on, the programmer and their familiarity. Again, whatever is they can create the fastest possible thing for you at the least possible cost. So I'm totally agnostic in terms of what platform or code base it's built in. As a student, you want to learn prototyping. Again, I would say find some system that you can program to some degree or script, whatever you're familiar with, and then imagine how you could actually create some simple interactive experience with that. Do that a few times, and now start imagining, okay, how can I make that better? What questions do I need to answer? So basically, this, again, is a navigation instrument for you. It's a compass to help you figure out, I want to go this way or that way. And just playing with simple rule sets, you can kind of get a sense of how you navigate the kind of a tree.